than actual flower shows, because people aren't as intimidated about asking questions, because questions are always nice and there's never the wrong question. There can be the wrong answer, but never the wrong question. So I'd like to thank the tech team at the East Hampton Garden Club, Julie and Debbie and Kate, for holding the fort. And I'd like to welcome you all. I can't say, well, you could be out doing all these wonderful things, because we all seem to be locked up in our houses, perhaps not as much in East Hampton, but here in San Francisco, we have been under, at my age group, which is old, we've been under lockdown. I mean, we're not supposed to go anywhere, and I'll tell you, I don't. So, oops. Why am I not moving forward? Well, there we go. This car, you might have seen it driving around East Hampton when we were living there. It's my husband's 1927 Bentley, and we kept it in England for quite a long time. And it's a great car for going and looking at gardens in, because you are quite welcome to drive to the front door. And usually the owner of the house wants to have a ride in your car. So it's and the people that we stored it with, finally, when we left it there and would come back every year to go to Ascot, I met her at a garden club lecture. And so the garden club is the most incredible networking and way of connecting with other people that are all of similar minds to you. Now, what I did for 17 years was I worked for a British film company, specifically on their souvenir. Started out with a video, and then it became a DVD of the Chelsea Flower Show. And we filmed it in the 2 weeks that lead up to the show, which are arduous weeks for all of the exhibitors, because they start out with just basically a strip of lawn, and they build the most incredible gardens that you will see. And then they last for a week, and then the gardens are usually always recycled, which is nice to know. And some of the plant material is sold off to people the last day, and you see people walking away with carrying the largest plants you've ever seen, or in the strangest, with baskets between two people on a pole carrying something large. Now, the reason I've left this on for so long is that Chelsea does sell out. There are 2 members days, but member days are sold out as well, and they're huge crowds. There are 550,000 members of the Royal Horticulture Society, and there are about 168,000 tickets. So you can see why, if you decide to go, which I think I still recommend for everybody when things get back to normal, get your ticket early, and you must make your reservation for lunch. Now, I started out, well, even at the end, I was always the oldest person on my film crew, which for people that didn't know with whom they wanted to speak, always thought I was the one they should speak to. But in fact, I was really always the lowest of the low on the totem pole. And everybody's basically about 20 years old and, off to great careers in the media. But by the time I left, I was on the Royal Rota. And the Royal Rota means that my cameraman and I were allowed to follow the Queen when she is at the Chelsea Flower Show. Otherwise, your cameramen are only allowed to film her as she walks by. She does not like to be followed, as you can imagine. There's my friend Gail Cook. Just appeared on my screen. And so one of the problems, though, when you get to follow the Queen, is you have to, most of the time, walk backwards to film her advancing towards you, because you want to see her face coming, smiling, looking at the flowers, or pointing off on the directions of this or that thing she's admiring. And but nevertheless, the Queen was a very popular person to have in your videos or in for the press. The show takes place on the grounds, on the bank of the Thames and on the ground of the Chelsea Pensioners Hospital, which is the most beautiful Christopher Wren building that you'll see in a future slide. And then they build a huge pavilion every year that is filled with displays of plant material and a few gardens. This is partially done because of the inclement weather in England, but all of the main gardens are out on the grounds. And here we are filming vegetables, my cameraman and I. The cameramen are absolutely wonderful. They're all young and darling, as I said before. It's great. I really enjoy working with young people because young people have so much enthusiasm and energy. And that's Paul and William. Now, here is a picture of the Great Pavilion from the outside. And in the back, you see the brick Christopher Wren buildings where the pensioners actually live. It's not really so much of a hospital, it's really where these old guys live who were soldiers of the empire. And then around the grounds, they build 26 large show gardens and about 25 very small gardens, because as great as it is to come and see these incredible show gardens, not everybody has that kind of space. And England does have a lot of sort of cottage type gardens, or, you put a garden in your little front yard, which is a very small area, but England is definitely a nation of gardeners, with them with green thumbs. The getting together to celebrate horticulture, gardens, plant material, etc., is sort of a long time tradition in England. And here you see Queen Victoria at one of her parties at Buckingham Palace. And this was a way to give the Queen or the royal house publicity and to sort of affirm their right to be ruling, and keeping everyone sort of enthralled and entertained. And even today, Queen Elizabeth is, for all of us who watch The Crown, is having parties, lots of parties at Buckingham Palace, not only garden parties, but that's a great way to have a lot of people. And it sort of solidifies everybody's enthusiasm for gardens, nature, parties, which are all sort of British traditions. And into the British tradition idea, you can see this lovely array of yummies and bottles of just champagne. England per capita consumes more champagne than France, which I always thought was an interesting idea. And now with the England heating up, that Prince Charles is actually growing champagne grapes at Highgrove and producing a line of Highgrove champagne. Now, the picture on the top is Queen Victoria, who's another favorite of ours, out in the Highlands. Not quite, she actually did get her own Highlander, maybe not Jamie Fraser from Outlander, but she's got the, what was his name, Brown, who was her, I don't know, in charge of her ponies or something. And they're out having a great picnic, but it was a serious event as well, because they collected plant material. And if you were a proper lady, you collected your plant material and brought it home and dried it and pressed it and put it in a little notebook, and you recorded all of this interest in plants. The other thing that we're all familiar with, I think, is from Downton Abbey, and there's the Dowager Countess having tea in front of Highclere, or Downton Abbey as it was called in the TV program. And while researching the British habit of tea, I discovered that the Victorians loved to make tea out of Bermondsey, or as it's now frequently called, Datura, which is quite hallucinogenic. When I used to work in a nursery down in New Bedford for Alan Haskell, who was a GCA gold medal winner, the guys, then the landscape crew, used to collect blossoms off the datura plant. And well, they're in San Francisco, you just walk down the street and you'll pass one, and they dry them and then smoke them. It was sort of an at-home high. So at Chelsea, of course, we see this celebrated as well, this love of the alfresco dining. And here we have Jamie Oliver making a pizza in his pizza oven that was in his Chelsea garden. And since the pandemic has started, my son and grandson have built a pizza oven in our backyard. Now, opening night at Chelsea is the sort of for me, one of the highlights. The last day after everybody gets ready for the show takes place on a Monday, and early in the morning, the judges go around and judge and award the medals and all of those things. And it's a very serious thing. As we all know, judging is from the GCA, judging serious. But then the press all come, and the gardens are usually sponsored by moneyed institutions. And so a garden, typical garden, I'll show you the Chanel garden, which was $600,000 about 10 years ago. So you can see that the money that's put into these gardens is really substantial. But the gardens, what was it? I've lost my train of thought there. I was so shocked with the amount of money again. But so the press come, and usually they're, movie stars work for these cosmetic companies, and then the insurance companies, magazines, and they all sort of pose for pictures in these various gardens that their sponsors are sponsoring. And so there's all these celebrities and all the press taking photographs. But about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody is cleared out. And in the beginning, I actually was locked up in our studio, where we sort of keep all our equipment and sort of reconnect with our different teams, because the Queen comes and they go through the whole grounds with bomb smelling dogs. And then actually the minor royals come, because the Queen is the last to be there. So everybody has to wait for her, as you can understand, no matter what the event is, that she arrives and everybody's there to cheer her. And so she goes around and looks at the gardens and with all the minor royals, and there's a lot of them, and they all look beautiful and interesting and fascinating. And then about 6 o'clock, she goes off to a little, they call them chalet, off sort of on the edge of the garden, and has her lobster and champagne or whatever she's having. And then the washed horde comes, or those are the people that have spent $900 for a ticket to the gala, and the tickets to the gala sell out in 24 hours. We stopped filming the gala for our video because, one, it wasn't available for people to buy tickets for, and it sort of suggested that it perhaps wasn't the most egalitarian event of the week. But so at this point, I'm going to ask Debbie or Julie to take a poll, because I'd like to know whether you'd rather have lobsters and champagne or tea and crumpets and clotted cream. And I think there will be a poll that will appear on your screen momentarily.
It's there, and so you should be, I have to launch it. Here we go. It's now. Yeah. And as you answer, everybody, the answers will accumulate.
What time of day? Is it the morning or evening?
Well, I should have put a third option, that you'd have both and stay all day.
Yes. Let me tell you, after a day walking around there, you need both.
Yeah, I want both.
See if you can check 2 boxes.
Okay. Yes, you can.
Oh, good.
I think Gail needs to mute herself.
I had to put my 2 cents in.
So I think everybody has about answered. So I think lobster and champagne wins.
I think it does. I've done a few programs with, well, actually the GCA one where we went to the Shirley Manice conference. You could order a bottle of wine, or you could order, actually it was a 3-pack of wine, and then sit and
Get rid of this.
sit and listen to the woman from Napa Valley who gave a lecture on sustainable growing of grapes, gave a wine tasting. And I think that I wish the GCA would do that again. The wine was absolutely fantastic. As my husband said, it was the best $100 bottle of wine that he's ever had. But now the other reason to go to the gala is that you get to that evening walk around the garden, in the garden, which is not something you're normally able to do at flower shows in America. You know, you look at the garden from the outside, but at the gala, you can actually walk in the garden, and you can bump into people like Camilla and Prince Charles walking in the garden as well. This also makes it harder for the landscape designers and the team because everything has to be perfect from every point of view, not just from the outside of the perimeter of the garden. And this is another example of what goes on in the evening at the gala. This is the David Austin's exhibit, and all these beautiful David Austin roses, and you can see a string quartet playing music. It's just a charming event. And there's another example of David Austin roses. And the plant material is brought to Chelsea in these giant vans. So this one's a David Austin van. And can you imagine having that drive up to your house and just unload David Austin roses by the dozens? And that happens, you know, like for days and days. They just keep coming and coming. And you think that you've seen the garden just about ready to be finished, and then more plant material is added. Now, the first year at Chelsea was back in, that it was Chelsea as we know it now, and held at the Royal Hospital, was in 1913. Prior to that, they'd had flower shows at various other locations. And this was a rock garden. Rock gardens are still actually quite the rage. But what I found was quite interesting was, as a landscape designer, it says, to visit me and or visit Mr. Wood, and you can save endless expense and disappointment if you do get a landscape architect. And the year he entered this as his exhibit, he did win a gold medal. And so you can see it looks sort of sparse. One of the things I found very interesting also was, back in those days, especially, that only men were really allowed to come to Chelsea to work on the gardens, and that if you had an estate garden, which many of the members do, you didn't have women gardeners. And Prince Charles right now has, maybe within the past 10 years, now has a woman that is the head gardener at Highgrove. And I obviously, there were lots of women in landscape design history in England, or not lots, but there were several that tried to start schools for women as a opportunity to better yourself and then get a job in somebody's garden. But you know, gardeners weren't supposed to be seen in the garden anyway. And if your employer you heard him coming usually with his guests, and he was showing off his beautiful garden to, you would hide behind a hedge. So women have come a long way in landscape design. You have all these really well-known women designers at Chelsea, who I will mention, you know, like Arabella Lennox Boyd. Now, these are the two most important things to think about at the Chelsea Flower Show. And one is the Queen. It is the Royal Horticulture Society, and she does open the show every year. Her family participate in sponsoring gardens, and we'll look at some of those. The Queen really sets the tone for the nation. But the other people that the Horticulture Society is very, very interested in now are the children, are the young people. And we know that the young people are becoming very involved in a movement to try to save the planet from global warming. And so the Royal Horticulture Society has embraced them with open arms, and they now have lots of exhibits at the Chelsea Flower Show that are geared for young people, as well as information for them and programs for them on their website. And I suggest that everybody check out the RHS.org website just to see what they offer for all of us. Now, here we have some little children. This is the future ruler of England. Actually, there are two future rulers of England. This is Prince George and Prince William back here. And Kate, his wife, the Duchess, designed a garden for children for Chelsea that was very warmly embraced recently. And as we see here, that you can't start teaching children to love to garden and love nature and love plants and those kinds of things too early. The Royal Horticulture Society, in their demands, not demands, but in their, when they tell you what you're supposed to do to qualify to be able to have a garden at Chelsea, they make sustainability a very important factor, and your garden better have something that's really positive along what people need to do, what people can do, and what's important. And Fortnum and Mason did a beautiful garden with, you can see these elegant little beehives in the back, and where they have copper roofs, which don't show up in this picture, but these beehives are just filled with little bees buzzing around the Chelsea Flower Show collecting honey, and they will be put up on the roof of Fortnum and Mason's store on Piccadilly, which means that the little bees that live in there will be able to go over to Buckingham Palace and visit the Queen's flowers. Now, when I first started, this is the first year I went to Chelsea, and this is a Tom Stewart Smith garden. And we'll look at some of his work, more recent work lately. He's just sort of gone wild in the field, as a lot of people in England have, designers. But this was a garden he did for Chanel. It took $600,000. The plant material was sourced in Belgium and grown there for a year in a nursery. You do find out that you get to do a garden at Chelsea a year in advance, so you can start getting your plant material ready to exhibit. Now, all of this interlocking C parterre in front was planted. That's 2,000 boxwood plants, and they were planted in 40 metal trays that in the greenhouse all laid out just exactly as they were going to be here. And then they were grown, clipped, fed, all sorts of things, patted every day, spoken to, told they were loved. And then they took to bring them to Chelsea. They just moved the 40 trays that the boxwood was growing in. They were all numbered, of course, and they put them back together when they got to Chelsea, and they just fluffed them up. And you had, voila, a beautiful interlocking parterre that looked like it was many, many years old. The other thing that was interesting, well, you don't see too many of the white plants, but there are a lot of white plants. You can see the digitalis around the edges. They needed a focal point, as most gardens do. And so they had this beautiful statue, which is the Medici Venus, and it came from Stowe. It was on loan. And how they got Stowe to lend them their Venus that's in one of the Temple Follies was they said, "We will pay to gild her gold." And so she is now, you can see her at Stowe on your garden tour, in her own little temple. And she's in her glorious gold skin. The gardens as new as they come, and the cutting edge. This was a cutting edge for brown plant material. Nobody had did brown plant material before. Christopher Bradley Hull did this garden, and this garden is interesting not only in that it's called the Latin garden, and it's signifies, or you, when you're walking through the garden, you're going on Virgil's trip through, I guess, the underworld, or Dante went to the underworld. Virgil did a trip also in the Iliad. And so along the path there are, carved into the stone, are passages from, in Latin, of course, from the Aeneid. And that's sort of an interesting thing to think of, because this was something that was very popular at a lot of the English landscape gardens in the 18th century. The garden was, you went on a trip and through the garden, and you learned something while you were on your journey. Now, this goes to show you an example. You can see these young people are all wearing little booties over their shoes in the garden while they're working on the setup to keep. Everything is just so meticulous and so precise. And this is actually a very interesting way of clipping hedges, with the two hard clipped hedges along the bottom edge, and then the fluffy top. We see that in a lot of French and Italian gardens as well. And then you can look over here on the right at all of this beautiful sort of wildflower type meadow that's growing there. Now, this is a close-up of that wildflower meadow, and you can see it's just exquisite. And you can see how hard the people are working on creating perfection in the garden, and everything is just ticky-poo is the word. And so, as I've often said about the GCA, that Army marches on its stomach. And here I am with my cameraman having probably about our 9 o'clock coffee. We usually, the other part of being the lower in the totem pole is that you get the 5:30 calls. And so we'd start filming at 5:30 in the morning. And so we were ready for these disgusting bacon and egg sandwiches. And the cuisine that's offered to us workers prior to the show is not what you see during the Chelsea Flower Show, actually. Now, plant material is really obviously exceedingly important to the English, and partially because of the collector aspect. And you need to, if you're going to have an allium, you don't just have one allium in your garden. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have a lot of them, and you do know their Latin names, and you're very proud of the fact that you have this collection, and that you're able to sort of make a statement about the value of horticulture. Now, for vegetables, the same thing goes. This is Medwin's, who does an incredible vegetable array every year. When I gave this lecture, one of my guests told me that she was there, I wasn't, the year Medwin did an exhibit like this of different kinds of potatoes. He had something like 60 different varieties of potatoes, and you can go to their catalog. I went to their catalog online the other day, and you can buy blue turnips, and you can buy all sorts of fantastic things. And in fact, you can have seeds sent to you in the States. Now, the other thing that the Royal Horticulture Society is very interested in is the aspect of the healing that gardens do, and how important it is for humans to be not only in touch with nature, but in touch with water. And water is going to be something that we need to think a lot about. I know Julie asked me if I had ever seen a Beth Caddo garden at Chelsea, and I never have, but once again, she did a totally dry garden with no water. And I know that out in East Hampton, the aquifer is getting lower and lower, and that's something that all of you will need to be thinking about. Now, here in this garden, not only are the plants beautiful, and we have this little pavilion, but we also have water as the center and the heart of the garden. And the water is very important for humans, and it not only it soothes us, it's a tranquilizer, and it cuts out if the noise from outside of the garden is another valuable aspect of it in a garden. Here's another example of a water garden that's all green. Perhaps these lilies in a couple of days will be in bloom for the opening day of the show. I'm not sure, because they do have flowers on them, and I'm sure they're probably bright red. Now, we still do have, this desire for the English garden where more is more. And
I wish we never met.
oh, somebody needs to turn off their microphone. These are the judges. These are the great judges. They go around in groups of 10 and judge the different gardens on that early Monday morning. Now, I am getting a very dirty look from Bunny Guinness, because she, you're not supposed to take pictures of the judges. They don't like it, because they have to raise their hands to vote on gardens, and they don't like to be on record for their choices of whether people should get the gold, or whether, a lower medal, if anything at all. And so, but there they are. And I found it interesting that out of this group of 10, there are only 3 of them are ladies. And Bunny Guinness is a very well-known landscape designer. I mean, she's a very important person in the world, and she's probably a member of the Royal Horticulture special group. And this garden was, now this is how we see gardens having sponsors. It's sponsored by the Cancer Society, and they put this wooden sculpture going through it, because it sort of shows that all together we come together somewhere and we can defeat cancer. But what's important about this idea is that here gardens have a message, and I think that's something we so often forget, is that gardens do have a message. In the big pavilion, there are several bonsai societies where members of bonsai societies exhibit their plant material, which is something to be very proud of. This is not that old of an azalea, but it's absolutely gorgeous. I think it was started in 1965. And we all do love flowers, pink flowers especially, but I call your attention to the little plant next to it. I do not know what it is, and no one has ever sent me an email after my lecture to tell me what they think it might be. It doesn't have a label on it, and it is just the sweetest little bonsai that I can imagine. But imagine if you forgot to water that for one day. It would be one less bonsai plant in the world. Now, this gives you an example of the array of different garden styles that we still see here. We see this lovely tropical garden. Orchids are very popular in England. And so there are lots of orchid growers that just do a whole garden, but this one with waterfalls is especially interesting. The palm trees on the side, these are small palm trees, but palm trees used to be used quite a bit more in gardens. They grow in I guess in desert or oasis conditions. One year the Sheikh from Abu Dhabi did a garden, and we actually sent a film crew to Abu Dhabi to film him loading the palm trees that he grew in his garden in Abu Dhabi onto his private jet and flying them to Chelsea. But carbon footprint making now is not encouraged, and so most of the plant material comes from either England or there are a lot of very fine nurseries in Belgium, or for the old trees, Spain or Italy. Now, these lovely peonies that we see over on the side have the little darling parasols over them, and it's not really part of the show. This is still prior to the opening. As you can see back in the back right hand corner, there's all these film cameramen with their green vests on, and we do wear, you know, green vests to be safe on the show during the filming, because inevitably there are all these trucks still coming with more and more plant material, and we don't want to get run over. And then down on the bottom right is a suggestion for a yoga garden. And I think that you perhaps don't need to really have a yoga garden, that any little corner and a bit of lawn would be a quite nice place to practice your yoga. Or you can go down to the beach in East Hampton. This was a Laurent Perrier garden, and it's as elegant as the name, the Champagne, sounds. And one thing that's, I think you find very interesting is the plant material that's all in beautiful profuse blossom wouldn't be in reality. And so these gardens at Chelsea are eye candy in many ways. And so they're not real. They're just to warm your heart, to inspire you to go on with your gardening. And here we have, as mentioned, children. This is on press day. A group of school children, and they're all in little matching jackets, which makes me think that it's a school class here. I see the man has a sweatshirt on that says lovethegarden.com, so maybe that's a group from a video program. But what we have are young people, very young people, coming and looking at the garden and talking about it. And the little girl on the bottom right hand is, you know, has her chin and her holding her, you know, thinking about it. They're serious. Children are serious about things. It's wonderful. Now, this is Dermot Gavin. He's the Irish heartthrob superstar of the garden world. And he has done many beautiful gardens at Chelsea, but this was the most outlandish one that he started when on his outlandish style. And you can see that it's a very traditional British garden green, lots of different shades of green. The boxwood balls are clipped perfectly. And your garden pavilion here, you sit in this little skycraft thing that is held up over the garden by a crane. So while it's not exactly the most a possible thing, and it went to Liverpool to a park. And I think that on very special occasions that the crane will operate and take you up there if you have so desire. But it won a gold. It won Best in Show. It was the people's favorite. The gardening world is very, the Brits enjoy wit. And I would say this is a witty garden pavilion. So the year after, Dermot decided, well, I'll get one up myself. And so he built, this is an 80-foot tall garden. And you see them in the red jackets. Those are the pensioners that live at the Royal Hospital. And the RHS said, no, you can't to Dermot, you can't let anybody go up there. It's not really safe because, you know, people would fall off. And the pensioners said, are you kidding? We have protected the British Empire from all sorts of hordes of evil and under the most drastic conditions. And of course, if we want to go up in Dermot's garden, we are going to go. And so they all went up there and they posed for this great picture. Now, one of the press, I love it, said, this is a towering garden for a man with a towering ego. But on the right, you can see how he has areas of it on different floors, that you have your roses growing, you have your box balls clipped, you have some more peonies and a little pink pavilion. It's a little folly, the English folly for your garden, to sit out there and, read your book, read your gardening catalogs, read Tatler or Queen. And then you have a greenhouse to grow your whatever you need to grow, probably some veggies, and a swing, of course, so that you can swing and your kids can swing. And then he built his office at the very top of it. And so he said, oh, I need to be able to get down quickly. And so he built this wonderful tube, or this metal tube to go down, and it's a slide, but it's completely enclosed. And for some reason, I don't know why I did it, but I went down the slide, and it was absolutely the most terrifying thing that I have done. And I was so sorry afterwards, and I swore I'd be a lot more circumspect in my gardening activities. But we get back now to other gardens that are really more typical, more real, more imaginable. And here again, we see the beautiful clipped boxwood balls, but these boxwood balls now have been squashed down like little pancakes. And I love that sort of look. And in fact, looking at this has sort of made me realize it's something I hadn't even noticed before. And I think I have some boxwood balls of my own in the backyard, and I keep saying I'm going to go out there and I'm going to sort of make them into little pancakes. And I know that a lot of you have boxwood balls in East Hampton, that maybe you might want to start with one or two and see how it works, see if you really like it. Now, we go from that very stark one to a clean one to this sort of, more is more aspect, shabby chic almost. And I thought it was rather interesting that the chairs are all planted socially distanced apart. I don't know what that's all about. But along the back edge, you see there's that tunnel, that pergola thing so you can go walk around, look at your garden, sit in there in bad weather, or if it gets too sunny, you can sort of it looks like half of the U goes around the garden. And there's water. We have lots of plants. We have sort of a wild look, but it's not really a wild garden. It's just a wild, it gives you that feeling of that. And another garden with this beautiful sort of wild look planting, but it's all contained. And there's paths along the edge. And then here you can do your Zen meditation, or just sit and look at your garden out of the sun. And you'll hear water. There's water to sort of dabble your fingers or your feet in. But it's all these British elements of garden design that we love, they love, and they've introduced to really the whole gardening world forever. But even now, Chelsea, the world looks to Chelsea for what is the latest and the greatest in gardening. And as a Californian, I love this garden. It's a biodynamic vineyard up in Marin County, and their wine is quite potable. But this is her third gold. The owner's wife has done this, done the garden design. And you see the bird houses. So they've got birds that, go after the insects. They have plants planted that the insects don't like. They have water pumping things so they can pump their own water. And what I love is this picnic table. It just needs a bottle of wine on it. It goes to show gardens are for people, and they're places to come and just celebrate life. And what could be nicer than to drink a glass of wine sitting in the middle of this vineyard garden at a recycled picnic table. Now, this is my favorite garden. And Luciano Guibelli is actually Sienese, and he comes from a long line of Italian bankers. And the beautiful flowering plant material in the centers of the garden are done by Garrett from Great Dixter. But it has, once again, all of the elements of what you think of a British garden. You have these sort of ball-shaped plant materials. I forget what it is. If anybody really wants to know, send me an email and I'll look it up. But you see the gravel gardens now, we're sort of looking at, not so much water is needed here. And these plants obviously are doing quite well in the gravel. And then going back, if I can go back, you see we have a very small amount of the famous British lawns, because we do usually think of British gardens with lawns. The garden that also won one year the best in show, the people's favorite, was done by James May, who you may or may not know from there's a car Top Gear, and he drives fancy Ferraris around Europe testing out cars every week for a television program. But he decided, he also built a house out of Legos, which was wonderful. But he decided to build a garden out of plasticine. And plasticine is something like a cross between Play-Doh and slime that was, they used it to make the Wallace and Gromit movies. It's used a lot in filmmaking. And he had hundreds and hundreds of volunteers making all of these little flowers and whatever for this garden. And then it was, they had to make a special award because it's a garden that doesn't have any plant material. And one of the things that's interesting, once again, you see in this British garden, you have the little picnic area. I mean, you do have your alfresco dining, which is something so important. And then the other thing that's less visible here in this picture is the tree is through 4 seasons all in one bloom. There's the early blossoms of apple blossoms. There's the apples hanging from the tree, the fall leaves, and then of course the branches. Now, when I mentioned that the Horticulture Society, they say the you have to, in your brief of what your garden's going to be about, you have to have sustainable aspects and you have to have a message for your garden. And so while this is a fantasy space station at Mars, there's a, I guess the astronaut was going to put this down at the bottom of the ladder from his whatever. And you see he's planted vegetables and courgettes, because English people like courgettes, and marigolds to sprinkle on top of your packaged plastic wrapped salad material. But we know that this won't happen because there's no water on Mars, even if we go there with Elon Musk. So thinking about water and climate change once again, we can't join Ringo Starr in his Octopus's Garden Under the Sea, as fun as that might be. One of the gardens, well, this doesn't, isn't quite as aesthetically grabbing as some of the beautiful flower gardens. It definitely has a message here. Inside these typical forms that we are used to seeing in gardens for trellises, they have solar panels and they're solar collecting, and then the gray water from the house is pumped around the garden for irrigation with the energy from the solar panels, and then recycled crates have been used to create a wall. And so there's, then I do not know, I don't have a picture of it, but there was the compost heap became a center thing in the garden as well, center feature. So on a larger scale, not only can you do things in your garden, but you could do something for a small town or an urban area. And so this is a kinetic sculpture, and it's run by both the sun and the wind and the moon, I've been told. And it's used once again to pump water and to create power through your town's electric grid. And you can see it again at nighttime because, you know, there's night as well to think of. And so I guess that's why they say moonlight will activate it as well. Now, this obviously isn't something that's really totally real right now, but it's definitely something that we all need to think about. And so, speaking to climate change, here we have all these beautiful little irises, and they're wrapped in advance of the show because it's getting hot this year. It was getting hot. And so to keep the irises from coming into bloom before the show started, and so when they were basically on stage, they wrapped them and tied them all with little pink bows. And it's very sweet, but it's also a very serious reminder of what we're facing as gardeners or humans. And so we have also these fine old trees, but this olive is kind of reminds me of what's happening to a lot of the trees. They're dying because they're not getting enough water. And I don't know, when the trees die, I wonder what happens to all of the fungus that now we know that there's a whole web, a worldwide web practically, of fungus among the trees. And that's how trees communicate with each other. And what they die when the trees die, they die when they're burnt. I don't know. And so the Royal Horticulture Society, even in the pandemic, decided to go on, and they had a virtual Chelsea flower show, which we might all be watching together in 2021. So they said to their members, well, send us a picture of your garden. We want to see what your garden does, and we'll give medals this year anyway for members' gardens. And so this is the one, was the members' garden of the year. And once again, you see the box balls, you see a lot of gravel in the garden. It's probably used as a path here, but it's gravel. And it doesn't need to be watered. You're seeing vegetables growing over mixed in with the plant material. And you see there's the little pavilion that you always have to have in your garden. I'm sure there's a water feature somewhere in this too. But I thought that it was very telling that this is what members voted on, to say that this is, you know, the quintessential British garden. And so as I'm coming to the end of my lecture, I'm asking you to think about gardening, whether it's just, you know, in a formal garden. And man and nature are really part of, or should I say, man is really part of nature. And it's in gardens that man and nature really come together. And even when you say French gardens, you know, that are clipped in parterres, and it's not man torturing nature, it's man just sort of putting his view of what nature should be. And it's a collaboration. And so I invite you to think about that in your garden. And if maybe you don't have a garden, maybe you just go and walk in the woods, or maybe you dedicate part of your property to just a wild area. And if you have a wild area, that's also good for the wildlife. I know the wildlife in East Hampton is the deer or something to be reckoned with. But on the whole, all of the small creatures that live and thrive in the woodland, it's something else that now is becoming a very important part of garden aspects in England, is to provide for wildlife, because they need gardens, they need plants. And so the Royal Horticulture Society's aim is to get everybody to grow. And my goal is to inspire a passion in gardens to grow, and to realize the happiness that comes from gardening and a connection with nature. And together, then we might just save our world, the planet Earth. And I can imagine sitting down at the end of my garden in this little garden hut and contemplating a lot of things and just enjoying nature and gardening.
Natasha, thank you. Is that your garden, by the way?
No, it is. I wish that were my garden. And I will, just for fun, send you a picture of my garden. My garden is the largest portion of my garden is a soccer field for my grandson.
But you can wield it looks like you can wield a saw. There you are.
It's an electric hedge clipper, and this was a lecture I gave at Madu on topiary. And I have to add that this straw hat in the right-hand corner was Charlotte Moss. I was very pleased to have Charlotte come and learn some topiary methods from me. And so I want to thank you all so very much for Zooming with me. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me and visit my website. And I'm going to add probably tonight a inspiration and resources area on my website, because there's a lot of things that I would love to share with people of what they can do, to say nothing of a list of gardens to visit in England. And so now I guess Debbie is going to answer any questions that or not, she's not going to answer. She's going to read any questions and I'm going to answer them.
So Natasha, we need you to stop screen sharing so we can go back to gallery view.
Oh, okay.
And Debbie, actually, I'm going to handle the questions. Debbie is tuning in from her phone because she had to drive her daughter to an appointment. And so just raise your hand like this if you've got a question.
I see
Penny. Penny, go ahead. You're muted. Yeah, that was good. Still can't hear you.
Now, can you?
Yes, there you
Yay. Go. Okay, so I had to leave the room because my dog needed some medicine. But I did hear Natasha refer to her website. And I think that my Fairfield Garden Club would be very interested in her lecture. So would the website be the right way for them to investigate this lecture?
They definitely would, because my website's basically an ad for my lectures. But they could also just send me an email.
Okay, but what is the website? Oh,
it's natashahopkinson.com.
That sounds, I can probably remember that one. Yeah. Okay, good. I will forward this to the program chairs of Fairfield Garden Club. And thank you very much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. As I said, I love to spread the message, you know, and it's sort of, I think it makes such a nice way to connect with our old garden club friends or make new ones on these Zoom things. I am so impressed with all of the Zoom lectures that the GCA has put on, and the you know, the horticulture conferences, and they've really risen to the challenge.
How many years does your presentation cover?
Well, it's probably about 10 years. I went back this morning and I was looking for something to add, and I saw these images that I had like totally forgotten about, and I do update it, you know. I've had it going for a few years, and I just update it when, you know, with the newer pictures that I brought back from a show. But I mean, I have 17 years worth of images, and I think that I only have 10 on this computer, and then the other 7 are on a hard drive somewhere. And, you know, the funny thing is, who's ever going to pull out these old hard drives and look at them? We have too many pictures.
Anybody else have questions? So if there are no questions, I just want to remind everybody, well, first of all, an apology, because I know we had a mix up on what time the lecture was today, so I apologize. That's all my fault. But our next Zoom is Monday, January 25th at 4 p.m. and it's about winter seed sowing. So this is for those of us who are here this winter. And it's a wonderful method of starting seeds, which takes very little effort and no grow lights. And so Cornell is leading that. And so I encourage anybody who's interested in trying out seed growing to join us for that. And then a really wonderful lecture on Monday, February 8th with Zone 3, Paige Dickey talking about her new book. And she is a very compelling speaker. I recommend highly that you join. We scheduled it deliberately near Valentine's Day because it's kind of a love story about herself and her husband, and you have to listen for it and how she tells a story about her garden. It's quite, it unfolds as the lecture goes on, and then you realize, wow, what a story she's telling us. So I highly recommend that. And I know Pam Sherlock is on our call. She is the zone representative for programs. But we look forward to seeing everybody in the future. And Natasha, thanks a million. I've actually watched Natasha's lecture on YouTube when she did it for the Museum of Fine Arts in San Francisco. And you changed a lot of slides. It was fun. So it was really fun to see that. And obviously you have lots of slides. So thanks, everybody. Nice to see you.
Thank you. It was nice to see you.
Natasha,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Natasha, thank you so much. That was
Thank
amazing.
you. It was a wonderful talk. Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me join in from the West.
Oh.
Thanks, Julie, for bringing us all together. Great job on all the programs. Happy New Year to all.
Happy New Year. That was Pam Sherlock speaking, our zone rep. But that was really fun.
Well, I have 2 other lectures, Julie.
Oh, send me a note.
Oh, I will. Because you mentioned that some of the slides changed. I tried to put in some more about the water situation, because that definitely is a problem. And out here that we are working, we're already in a drought. I mean, we really in California are, seriously. And I've planted things that I shouldn't have planted. Oh my God, I planted Barbara Tuffley's camellias in my back. I have 5 black pines, which have, lived here forever, so they're okay. But it's something to think about. And then Gail, what's your name? Edwina von Gaal, who's there out in your neck of the woods, is saying that you have to now I think it's 2 for 3. Every 3 plants you plant, 2 of them should be native plants. And the native plants are slightly better able to deal with the drought situations. But, the drought is, native plants need water too. Kirsten Bach, the Botanic Garden in South Africa, did an exhibit at Chelsea one year on how plant material in Africa is moving northward, or it's because of the climate conditions, and plants themselves are moving themselves, and they're not growing where they used to grow, and then they're finding them growing in areas that now have the climate conditions to which they used to grow in. And they're doing this obviously with bird seed and things like that, but or birds, eating the plant and then dropping the seeds, and then the seeds grow further. I'm not sure if it's north, because that's maybe is more towards the equator, but it's, that the plants are definitely changing, going to the zone that they like to be in.
I remember a lecture with Peter Del Tredici saying that New York's climate is now what the climate was in Washington, D.C. 30 years ago. And so the lilac festival, the Arnold Arboretum, I think has had to move up 1 or 2 weeks, because the date they used to have it traditionally, the lilacs would be finished blooming now. So gardeners, having understood bloom times, have really seen global warming happen, over the course of the last 30 or 40 years.
Well, I think Pam Dane is still on, and we had a mutual friend, Jeff Frank, who used to say all the trees are dying, if you remember, Pam.
That's a grim thought. I think we have to be more positive that we can reverse all of this. But
it's amazing in California to go to places that I saw when I was growing up towards Yosemite, and that where whole hillsides of forests are dead. They're just dead, the trees.
from drought.
from drought, and then also not just from drought, but then from the beetles, because once they become stressed by the drought, then they can't fight off the beetles,
Oh, that's dreadful.
and then they burn.
Oh, that's awful.
Julie,
Yeah.
there's a question in the chat,
Ah, thank you.
which says, Natasha, do you have any tips for visiting non-gala days at Chelsea?
Well, it's always pretty busy. The last day is somehow less frantic because the people that are there to, they're really sort of pushing to the front of the crowd to see the gardens are, sort of have already done that at the more toward the beginning of the week. But there's still, still huge crowds. And my spies tell me, I just never go back once the show starts. If I have to do something or drop something off for someone or see someone, then I will. But on the whole, it's really, oh, and I must say also, the shopping at Chelsea Flower Show, I didn't mention that, but that is really, whether you're buying antique garden tools, antique watering cans, vests from France to put all your clippers in your pockets. I mean, it's it's good fun. But so the best time, maybe they say early in the morning, but then, you have to get there really early and stand in line really early because the lines form. And then you sort of have to have an idea of where you want to go, which are the most popular show gardens. And most of the people sort of know what they want to see because the week of Chelsea at primetime television every night at 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock for an hour are the BBC broadcasts from the showgrounds saying, this is this. And so people have had a chance to sort of get an idea of what they want to see, and they can get a program and they can, map out their route. And, you just have to sort of, that's why I said, make a lunch reservation, plan on it, at tea stops, stop often, drink plenty of water, carry some Cliff Bars, it's just, that's what it is. It is. And that's, in a way, it's part of the celebration is to share it with other people. And, at tea, when you're whatever, introduce yourself to the person that's sitting at the next table and say, oh, I'm from the States. This is so wonderful. If you've done this before, and you have to just sort of look at it as a fun event that you're going to go with. But it's I mean, you can see everything in a day. I mean, you can.